Welcome everyone. I'm here with Kerri Rawson, who you just saw in that video, and we were backstage and I said, is this difficult for you? And she said, no, if I'm warned ahead of time.
I was warned 2 days ago, 2 days ago.
We did warn her and say, is that okay? Because that is her life, and Kerri, you are a survivor, as you heard in the end, and this is your book that you wrote called A Serial Killer's Daughter. And your life changed dramatically February 25th, 2005. And you say in the book, it's before Dad, my life, and after Dad. Explain that day, what happened. Was it an FBI agent who knocked on your door?
It was. So I grew up with a pretty normal childhood. I know people have a hard time believing that. So, I mean, my dad could be kind of a verbal brute, emotional holes, I found out later, you know, like I am an abuse survivor. But we had a pretty normal Midwest life. You know, I know everyone says, like, why didn't you know? But I mean, he was just my dad and I loved him. He was like my best friend. So, like, we went camping and fishing together, hiking. He moved me up and back from college a million times, moved me after I got married. I mean, I was on the phone with him the night before he was arrested.
Just a normal dad.
A normal dad asking me about the tire tread and oil change, you know, that's like our last convo. So the FBI, I was home from substitute teaching. I was living outside Detroit, Michigan. I'm a 26-year-old kid, been married 18 months. FBI sitting outside my door in a car waiting to arrest my dad. So they were waiting to arrest my dad, notify my mom in Park City, Kansas, notify my brother in Groton, Connecticut, he was with the Navy, and notify me. Because they didn't know what they were walking into. They had just confirmed Dad was BTK the night before with DNA. My DNA, I find out later. So the FBI guy, he knocks on my door, and my dad had always told me, like, make them prove who you are, check their badge. Well, I found out later he used these ruses, like he called them, like he would dress up like...
The irony there.
Yeah, like a maintenance man or pretend to be a policeman to get into these homes and murder these women. So, like, I am already in my head trying to vet this guy and prove that he's FBI. So he's like, you gotta show me your badge. I got my, like, foot in the door, like in the movie. So I'm like, can block the door. So I'm already, like, pretty on high alert.
Did you process that when he said, your dad's BTK?
Well, I let him into my kitchen, and he said, have you heard of BTK? Well, my dad had started communicating the year before in 2004. So I knew this was going on back in Wichita, but I wasn't very involved, which is probably good because I like to solve mysteries. Mm-hmm. So I would have been deep in trying to figure out who this guy was.
Right.
So when he said, have you heard of BTK? I thought my grandma, who was a widow, my dad's mom, I thought she had been murdered. So I'm like, is my grandma okay? And he's like, yeah, your grandma's fine. And then he just, boom, lays it on me, your dad is BTK. Not that we suspect he is, not that we're looking at him. I mean, they literally arrested him on 7 of the 10 murders. And he's like, your dad is BTK. And that's when everything changed. You were talking about that moment, like I was Kerri, he was Dad, and now all of a sudden he was BTK and I was BTK's daughter.
Did you call your mom right
away? I go into shocks and I'm like physically shaking. Somebody should have knocked me out. I'm just a kid. My husband's just a kid. We didn't have any family in Michigan. The local police department came and took care of us with the media, but literally somebody should have just taken me to the hospital and knocked me out because I literally was in physical shock for 4 days. Like, they flew me home to Kansas to be with my family. But, like, early on I was asking, like, the FBI, I was like, is my mom okay? I thought my mom had been murdered. Because when you find out somebody is a murderer in your family, you assume they've murdered, like, right now, you know? And he's like, no, we're talking about murders 30 years ago in the 70s, before I was even born. And so, you know, I'm trying to, like, can I call my mom? No, we're picking her up. Who's picking her up? The FBI. You know, they had picked her up to question her. They picked up all my family, my grandparents, aunts and uncles. My mom said she kept hearing all these people talking. You know, so I'm sitting here trying to alibi my dad, you know, saying like he's a church leader, Boy Scout leader, this really good guy. I'm pointing to his picture on the wall from church. And FBI agents like confused too. You know, like the police said later to us, they realized like they had an 8th family on their hands. So there's 7 families that had lost at least one person. The Oteros had lost 4 in 1974, most of their family. You know, they had been working with these families in some cases 30 years, and now they had an 8th family to take care of. And they said it was devastating to see us and know they had another victim family on their hands.
That must have felt good to hear, because your family on that side of it, you don't hear much about it unless it's blame. In your book, you say how normal it was, that, hey, my dad made my brother and I scrambled eggs, and then he murdered a grandmother a few weeks later. I mean, that's how much of a different personality it was. And people may ask you, did you see anything? Did you know anything? Your book is fascinating, and reading it, I read it within 24 hours. And your trip to Colorado, Grand Canyon, Arizona, just to hear of the everyday, normal dad and daughter conversation, and traveling really all along the West Coast, and thinking you had a normal childhood. So when you go back and think, did you question everything in terms of who was murdered when, and what you were doing at that time, that your dad was doing the most horrific things to 10 people?
Yeah, I talked to the agent for about an hour, and the first night I'm still trying to alibi my dad. So I made the mistake of Googling BTK, because I didn't really know anything. And so I exposed myself to crime scene photos, children that had been murdered by my father. He murdered 2 children, Josie and Joey Otero, 9 and 11 and 74. This is a year before my brother was born. I mean, he murdered a young woman in 77 when my mom was pregnant with me. So I'm sitting there trying to alibi my father, and I exposed myself to all of that. I already was in physical shock. And murders that are not my father's. There was this whole group that were trying to solve these murders for a long time online. The first time I heard the audio recording, he called in the murder of Nancy Fox in 77 the next morning.
And you recognized it right away?
Yeah, he uses the word homicide. It's a weird word to use if you're not police, but he's trying to sound like a police officer calling in a murder, like he's reporting it as a crime he committed. And of course, now I'm in hindsight, but I heard it, and that's when I knew. But earlier that day, when I was talking to the FBI agent, our neighbor, Mrs. Hedge, she was murdered in April of '85. I was 6. She was 7 houses down from us, 2 houses around the corner from my mom's parents. I would walk by her house, I knew her. She had gone missing. So as a 6-year-old, I knew she had gone missing, and I knew later they found her body strangled. Why does a 6-year-old know this? Well, my mom and dad have been talking about it and blaming, my dad literally was blaming it on this Mrs. Hedges' date that night. She was a widow. He had broken into her house, waited for her, strangled her, took her out in the country a few miles from our church.
Did you ever ask your dad why, in the correspondence while he was in prison? I know there was letters back and forth. Did he ever answer why?
Oh God, no. I mean, he really does not want to talk about it. After he was arrested, we did a letter writing campaign. My mom, my brother, the church, uncles and aunts. Some people went to visit him. We knew that first weekend based on what the FBI told us that he was guilty. That was helpful. The FBI called a few times. They said, we found evidence in your house under these floorboards, souvenirs your dad had cut from these murders. So we knew right away. There was no more alibying my dad after that. I even had told the FBI about Mrs. Hedge, because that one was unsolved. They didn't arrest him on that one, and I think I'm the first one to report that one. Because I told the agent, and he called back, and I think I was the first one to mention that one.
You had to mourn your father, the father that you loved, saying, well, I still love my dad, almost as if they were 2 different people.
Oh.
Is that how he acted? Like he could compartmentalize, be a great dad? Because in court, I heard him say, essentially, to the judge that, look, it's really difficult to be a serial killer.
Oh, well, yeah, so he uses the word compartmentalize.
Yeah.
There I am messing it up.
I know.
He calls it cubing. So, there's this famous quote by a detective saying that that's 90% BTK and 10% dad. And I like to push back and say he was 90% dad to me, and I guess 10% BTK. There's only one person that survived, a 19-year-old boy in '74, survived BTK. So now that I'm stronger and I've dug into things and gone into therapy, I really think he's 100% Dennis Rader, 100% dad, 100% BTK, and he's just showing you who he wants to see. So when he's in court, there's famous video of him pleading, and then the families a few months later were given the time to speak, and that's the time when, there was a 3-day thing, all the families could speak, give their victim statements. My dad's supposed to use that time to apologize, and my dad doesn't say he's sorry. Instead, he's thanking the police. It's called the Golden Globe. This is what we call it locally, the Golden Globe talk.
I heard it.
And he's talking about, how hard it is to be a serial killer, and then he calls my family pawns in his game. Well, he taught me how to play chess. And so here I am telling him in these letters, I love you, I'm sorry, I know something's wrong, I'm sorry, did something happen to you when little, what's wrong with you, I love you still, I know you're guilty, and he had wrote me after he pled, saying he had some problems and it was far away from family love, that's about the closest he ever got to apologizing. And then I'm sitting there in court. I wasn't in court, I was watching it online, and I'm reading through these transcripts, and I find out he's calling me a pawn. Now, is he doing that to protect my family, or is that just that narcissism coming through?
Narcissism.
I don't know.
You saw, from what I read, a card that he kind of scribbled, maybe a future murder that he was going to do. What did that do?
He was always making notes, MO notes, project notes. I mean, he even called his victims projects. He gave them numbers and nicknames. He was always stalking. So he had these long gaps, several years in between murders, and his last one was in '91. But he was always on the prowl, he calls it, hunting and stalking, looking for his next victim. So I'm home in May of '05 to get some stuff. My mom's cleaning out the house. We would never let her be back in our house alone. We always had family there with her. She's literally shredding my dad's high school stuff and college letters. I mean, how valuable would that be now for a criminology standpoint? But of course I had no idea. We were just letting mom get some therapy with a shredder.
Yeah.
So she's shredding, and my aunt was just her sister's let her go.
Yeah.
Just the living room was full of stuff. She's let her go, just let her be. So I'm going into my old bedroom, and I had been in college and then I moved out. Well, he had set up that bedroom with a card table and the eagle. Well, that's where he was making his damn BTK communications, in my old bedroom.
And also he had a shed out back?
Yeah, so he had an attached shed. He kept binders, and then he actually moved those binders. He was a compliance officer with Park City. So he was doing some of his BTK communications in '04 down the hall from the Park City Police Department. And my family's getting knocked for not knowing him, and I'm he was down the hall from the police department for 15 years.
The term hiding in plain sight,
exactly.
Right there.
So I'm in this bedroom trying to figure out, what am I going to take back with me? What do I even want from my old life? And I see this red and black true crime book sitting on my old bookshelf, and it's angled like somebody had read it and set it down. And I said, oh, hell. So I pick it up, and this business card from the 90s, early 90s, he worked for the Census Bureau after ADT. So my dad is so OCD, he had kept this business card for 15 years and was making murder notes of getting ideas of how to commit crimes, even though he had already done 10, and I see it in my dad's handwriting. And I think that was really sealed. This is real. I mean, it had been 3 months, but it was oh yeah, Dad really is BTK. But I swear it's been 16 years, and most days I don't think about even him as my dad. And then occasionally it'll be oh yeah, your dad's BTK. Mm-hmm. 16 years later, that's what trauma's like.
Well, you speak about trauma a lot in here, and getting therapy and going to church and really feeling and processing what that was like. I'd like you to read part of your book, which is so poignant, because I believe it's about trauma and PTSD and getting the help that you need from 2005 to now 2021, still processing that, because you're right. Your family is a victim. You were part of this. It's not your fault. You didn't know. We all try to say, what was the motive? Why? I even asked why. There's no simple answer. And even if there was abuse in his early age, it doesn't explain.
No, it doesn't. That's the big, I'm trying to study now and read, profiles on him, and I'm starting to talk to criminologists and doing criminology lectures because it helps me, but I'm trying to expand like that why and that narrow profile. Like, he wasn't a loner, he had a family, he had gaps, he's not insane, he had insane control, you know, and he's similar to D'Angelo. There's other guys, Green River, you know, there's other guys that have had families and were able to live, you know, he would work, murder, and then back to work, and then sit down and have dinner with their family.
And have
what
chunks
is
of
that?
time where he didn't do it.
Major gaps.
Yeah,
When
major gaps.
And the police at the time in the 80s, like, they had this big group, a task force called the Ghostbusters, and they're trying to find this guy because he had stopped communicating with them in '79. By the way, like, my first birthday, the night of my first birthday, in the middle of the night, he goes and drops off his last communication. So they're thinking like he's dead or in prison. They thought he was a loner. They thought he couldn't have a family. And so I'm sitting here trying to put a face on, you know, mental health, trauma, abuse, and on this side of being, you know, closely related to one of these guys, and say, you know, it's okay, I'm trying to normalize this because it's not normal, but I'm also trying to expand that education of what these guys are. We've got to think out of our boxes.
Even as a child, because it was known that BTK was on the loose, and you said to your dad something to the effect of, I'm concerned about this, and he said to you, you're safe. So he almost knew that, of course, people were looking for BTK because there were chunks of time that nothing happened.
Yeah, I mean, my mom, she was working at the VA, and he was gone. He was working at ADT security systems, so he was in your homes installing alarms and stealing things, casing places. And then he was going to criminal justice college at WSU. D'Angelo also went to criminal justice. I mean, we need to start checking these criminal justice guys. So, like, he was gone a lot, and there's these murders happening of these women in Wichita, and my mom even asked him in the 70s, like, she was scared. And he told her, you're okay, you're safe. And then when Mrs. Hedge, my neighbor, died in '85, I got night terrors. I'm sitting up in bed screaming. By the way, I still have them. So if you heard someone screaming in the hotel, it was me. So he literally told me, you're safe.
And this is part of your book where you say you were paralyzed, not able to live or move on, which is so understandable. And if you wouldn't mind reading that, and about trauma.
Yeah. It was an intense memory with a reddish-gray hue around it, like an ore, strong, and I was full of fear. I was stuck in 2005 on February 25th. I couldn't shake it, I couldn't escape it, and I couldn't get out from under it. It was killing me. I looked fine on the outside if you hadn't known me before, but I wasn't fine. My back was hunched over, my chest was tight squeezed. It was hard for me to look in other people's eyes, and I didn't want to. Balled up tight within myself, shutting down, sleeping a lot, moving slow, gray, murky, nothing. Then seething with red-hot anger, wanting to lash out at nothing and everything, hating myself and wanting to end all of it. Trauma. It had changed me physically, emotionally, spiritually. It wouldn't leave. Again and again on replay. I experienced that day the world broke out from under my feet and nothing had been the same or ever would be again. So I have PTSD from the time I saw that dumb FBI car until he left. By the way, he swabbed my DNA. It got stuck in my head and it was a loop, like a red memory that I would replay, almost like I intentionally was doing it. I thought I was going insane. 2 years. Shut down. I mean, I had 2 college degrees. I barely could work after what my dad did. Falling apart, suicidal, you know.
How did you get through?
I looked up trauma therapy. I hauled my butt into the trauma therapist in '07. And I was like whispering. I didn't even want to look her. I wasn't looking people in the eyes. And I was like, my dad's BTK. Can you deal with that? You know? And she's like, well, we'll keep your file in the special lock drawer, which is what they do for my mom too, like the doctors. You know, they're like, well, just keep that over here.
You even thought as you were about to turn 29, and that's when your dad started to murder, you thought, is something going to switch in me?
Oh, man. So I was in trauma therapy for 6 months. I was on medicine so I could function because I was my anxiety was so bad. I was having such bad stranger danger. I didn't want to walk. I still don't like walking outside by myself. You know, everything was setting me off. Cops, badges, they still can. And then, kind of like a goof, I got pregnant before I should have, you know? And so I wrote my dad once. So I had shut down after he called me a pawn. I hadn't communicated for 2 years.
In prison?
In prison. And then here I'm pregnant. I wanted him to know he was going to be a grandpa. And then I started thinking about my mom being pregnant with me, you know, these women that were murdered in front of their children, being a mom. I got very protective, and I shut down for 5 years, and I didn't write him. You know, and I just, like when I'm talking about being broken, I tried to just be a mom. You know, I was becoming like a volunteer ministry leader. I was running a preschool moms group, Bible study.
Were there good days and bad days at that particular point, or was it all bad?
No, you get stronger. Like after I got into therapy and she said, I told her about this memory and I thought I was going crazy and she's like, no, you have PTSD, and she literally gets the DSM-5 out and reads it to me. You know, because I felt like I wasn't a victim because I didn't think, nothing physically had happened to me. And I still get trolled on the dumb internet where people are like, nothing happened to you and you're not a victim. And I'm like, block.
But you lost a father, which block and mute are the best ever. But you lost a father who you loved, who you thought was someone that wasn't.
I mean, grieving. I had to grieve a man that wasn't dead, that wasn't who I ever thought he was. There was no funeral. I mean, my mom really handled it by she would say, your dad died that day. That's one of the ways she handled it. And I'm like, well, you're writing a dead guy, so I don't know. We'll just let it be, Mom. But, I mean, I lost this immense, very important person out of my life that I loved, and he was gone. But he was never who I thought he was. You know, and I've got this detective that still takes care of me. He's on speed dial. He was one of the guys, Detective Kelly Otis, that helped catch my dad. Mm-hmm. You know, and if I have a bad PTSD day, I'll call him. And he likes to say, every day of your life was a lie. And I'm like, Kelly.
Why so harsh?
Like, don't be hard on me, dude.
And it never ends. We were talking yesterday, just when you think it hits a new low. In prison, you were communicating with your father, and I was reading this, again, this is fascinating. Thank you for sharing your life in this. Yeah. It's raw and it's open, and the back and forth between you and your dad. And now you say, personally, I think it's because of a lack of control, he's now doing things where he's signing crime scene photos, if you could explain.
Yeah, so I ended up forgiving my dad in 2012. I had a 5-year gap of not talking to him, and as soon as I forgave him, it was more about me letting it go and letting that hardness go and what was breaking me inside. It had to be let go. I wasn't forgiving him for what he did. That wasn't my place. It was the victim's. It was the community's place. But I needed to let some of that anger and hardness go. So I let him know, and I let him know I loved him. And we were doing fine. He was doing so good for 4 years. But starting in 2014, I started working with my hometown newspaper, Wichita Eagle. I started talking. Well, he got the paper, so now he's following along, me running my mouth. And he even wrote the Eagle and said, she reminds me of me. She's fearless and independent, and uses the media. You know, so he's just trying to, that narcissism.
Trying to get at you.
Pathological liar, hardcore narcissist, psychopath, you know. So as I started speaking up and trying to put a face to mental health and trauma and survivorship and claw my way back to life, he's over here trying to insert his foot into everything. So my last letter to him was in the fall of 17. I literally was just writing the man about his grandkids and vacations we were taking and wishing he was there, and I wish I was just a normal kid and I didn't have this book and I didn't have this. I would do anything just to be me again. But he's gone bad. So he likes to send me drawings of gaping animals with gaping mouths with teeth.
How does he get that?
Well, he's allowed paper and color pencils. So the problem is, like, there's nothing wrong with him creating art, but he skirts the Son of Sam laws by he gifts them to people and they gift him money. So, I mean, it's even been in the news, like where I've talked to the newspaper, I've talked to the prison, I've talked to detectives, you know, like trying to shut this down. But I mean, he's even he sent like his knotted sweatpants out, gold fillings, glasses.
How was he able to get the crime scene photos in?
Somebody sent him a copy of Josie Otero strangled in it was back in 2019.
The child?
No, a couple years ago. Somebody sent it to him, and he's signing these crime scene photos of these kids. He's absolutely not allowed access to anything with his crimes. He's not allowed in my book. Somehow this is getting in, and somebody contacted me this spring and said, I'm sorry, but look what your dad's doing. I mean, he literally, someone had sent him a page from my book where I had signed it, and he did his BTK signature on it.
So the gasp in the room is,
yeah,
like
it never ends. And I'm literally just standing in Kohl's, and now I'm looking at a photo of poor Josie Otero. And I'm so shocked, I don't even want to send it to the woman at KDOC, Department of Corrections. So I said, I'm going to spare you this photo. I'm going to send it back to a detective that actually covered this case because you don't need this.
Was that enough for you to go?
Yeah. So between that and then he's been cyber stalking me. So he doesn't have internet, but he has letters and he has phone access. So he has fan club.
Phone access as in a computer almost. I mean,
he has a phone, so they can call him.
Oh.
So they like to print off my social media. I run my mouth on Twitter. They like to print off photos of me and what I'm doing, send them to him. And then I had people on social media contacting me, telling me oh, your dad's a good guy and what's your deal?
So you can't win. It's either it's your fault, you have no feeling, nothing happened to you, or your dad's a great guy.
Right. And so between that, dealing with that for the last few years, and this murder memorabilia market, black market he's on, and finding out that he was signing crime scene photos, I said, that's it, I'm done. So I've signed up for victim services through Kansas Department of Corrections. My family never had. They said, we don't know why you weren't signed up, but you are now. And I signed a legal cease contact order, and it was delivered to him the day before his birthday this year.
Was this book healing for you in a way of just saying, okay, if people are going to assume I'm a serial killer's daughter, I'm just going to say it?
Yeah, I mean, I lost myself. I wasn't Kerri anymore after 2005. You know, Dad wasn't Dad and I wasn't Kerri. I was BTK's daughter. You know, I was so shut down, I didn't even want to use that acronym. And then my husband said that after I forgave him, it was like I came back to being Kerri. I had let that go and I became Kerri. And that's who became strong. So I never meant to be in the media. I literally just took a phone call and stuck my dumb phone in my mouth. Now I'm like international news. You know, I just was so disconnected from it that I didn't even know anybody knew the story or had any interest in it. And here I'm news. But it was like healing on light speed talking about it. Mm-hmm. You know, and then I did a couple pieces, and this journalist, he's like, you gave me so many notes. He's like, I think you're a writer. And I was like, no. And he's like, I needed to do something with all this energy, and I needed to heal more. And so, people gifted me writing. So I learned to write, because I had to go find my dad again. Mm-hmm. To write the way I did, you have to figure out, you have to remember, how did they sound? How do they look? You know, what do they look like when they're happy? What do they look like when they're mad? That was all trauma for me. So I literally was back in trauma therapy in 2015. I walked in the Wichita Eagle book about my dad and went line by line, crime scene by crime scene, weapon, everything can set me off. Black gloves, in that video, you see the black leather gloves. My husband can't keep black leather gloves in our house when we were in Michigan. He had to keep them in the car because it can set me off.
And on page 292, you say this: Dad murdered Nancy Fox with Mom, was 3 months pregnant with me at the time. Dad murdered part of a family, a father, mother, and 2 children. Orphaning 3 children. Dad murdered 3 mothers in front of their children. Daughters, sisters, mothers, grandmothers. So you say everything that he did, how ugly it is, how excruciating it was for you. Have you been in contact with family members, survivors?
I haven't. So there's a few documentaries out there where you see them telling their story, and you see me, but we were filmed separately. So, I mean...
Have they been forgiving, considering
it
wasn't you were a victim as well, being the daughter?
Yeah, I mean, they've been supportive, and I've tried to support them, and everyone's just on their own journey of healing, and everybody deals differently, and I would never want to put them in a situation of having to sit across from his kid. You know, like someday if they want to meet me, that would be fine, but it's hard. Like, it's hard to see these families that are waiting, you know, they've lost somebody they've loved, and they're waiting for that answer. They're waiting for someone to be caught. And my dad did that. My dad did that to these families. And there's families here, you know. And I was ashamed for a long time, and I was scared, and I was so shut down. Like, to be on this side is rare. It's rare for those of us on this side to talk about it, you know. And finally, I had to, because it helps. It's therapy to talk.
Well, we thank you, and you're helping so many people. Have you found that at CrimeCon? I know it's your first year here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as soon as I started speaking up 6 years ago, people were contacting me, you know, like having PTSD veterans or having been abused as a kid or having trauma, you know, having a criminal in their family or needing to forgive somebody. I had no idea anything that I had survived would have any positive impact. I like helping people. I like doing good stuff. And realizing that something good could come out of this.
You aren't him.
I know. But like a criminologist told me, like, if you've helped one person, you've won.
In the book, you include where your daughter was getting old enough to say, why don't I have 2 grandfathers? How did you handle that?
Oh, man. She was like just this little 4 or 5-year-old, and Father's Day was coming up. I was upset, and she was like, well, shouldn't I have 2 grandfathers? And I said, well, you do. My dad is in prison. And she's like, what is prison? She's so little. And I was like, it's like a timeout, but a really long one. Like 177 years. I don't know how long it is now, but like just doing the math. So the problem then is like, I would start checking with her, because she's just this little innocent thing still. She's 13 now. But like, I would check with her as she's growing up, and I would occasionally check with her, and I'm like, well, what's the worst thing you think somebody could do? And she would say, like, a burglar. And I'm like, okay, no, we're not ready. Like, we're good. Let's just, you know. And I was trying to, like, of course, as a parent, you're trying to teach, like, be safe, stranger danger, you know, don't be opening that door to the UPS man, but I'm trying not to overdo it like my dad. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm trying to just be normal, even though I'm not normal.
I don't know what normal is.
Yeah. So the problem then is this sweet little girl is growing up, and then her brother's just barreling through life, walking at 10 months. I'm trying to keep him alive, you know, out of lakes, and he's just a go-getter. And so we were actually up north in Michigan in 17. Now I'm over deadline. I'm like falling apart from PTSD, literally calling a detective who's like, he's literally like, stop writing, put it away. And I'm like, I can't, I'm on deadline. Mm-hmm. And I know what it was. My son, Ian, he had been at school and people were talking about Stephen King's It. Oh. It was big then, and the killer clown. Yeah. And I was like, dude, that's not real. And I was like, that's it, I'm done. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of spitted it out. Like, I was like, Grandpa murdered people. Like, let's not worry about the killer clown.
How were they?
They're good. Yeah. Like, you know, they were like, we try not to use BTK around them. You know, we haven't let our girl have social media yet. You know, we try to be protective of them. So like
Do you think it would have been easier if he would have gotten the death penalty for you?
I mean, I would have to deal with a narcissist in my inbox. But I mean, I wrote about that in the book. Like, so my dad didn't qualify for the death penalty because legally it was not in action by law when he committed these 10 murders, because his last one was in 91. Now it is now enforced in Kansas. So I think I was almost relieved that I didn't have to lose my dad in that way, but he deserved to die. I mean, he deserved to die as soon as he murdered the Oteros. He knew what he was, he knew what he was capable of. He should have walked into a police station, or at least a mental health facility, psychiatric hospital, or something in 74 and said, I'm about to murder this family, help me. But he didn't. So he's always known.
Narcissists don't.
I mean, he's a sexual sadistic psychopath. He knew what he was, and he did it anyway. And he was in full control, and he chose to do it. So he should have been in prison in 74, but then my brother and I wouldn't be alive, my kids wouldn't be alive. What do you do with that? You know how many years of therapy that takes to deal with that?
You couldn't have stopped it. You didn't know.
I didn't know, but I knew our murder lady was, I knew our neighbor lady was murdered when I was 6. I just didn't know it was Dad.
How are you today in terms of a typical day in your thought process? Do you feel healed and at peace, or do you think you ever will feel that?
Day to day, I'm a mom, a wife, a writer. I love writing. I love sitting like Panera and writing.
Right. We were talking on the phone, and you said Panera is where I wrote the book.
Yeah, I literally got out of trauma therapy, and then we talked, and I was like, I just got out of trauma therapy. But, I mean, day to day, I try to just live my life and be me. I mean, this is my first conference, my first crime con. Everyone's been amazing. So, I mean, it's just another baby step of healing to be able to look you all in the eye. I've been introducing myself as BTK's daughter because I'm just going with it at this point. So, like, it's good for me to be able to look you all in the eyes and have your support and love and care. Like, I never expected to be embraced by this community, So it feels good.
And again, I'm sure you've heard it by professionals that it's not your fault, it wasn't you.
Yeah.
But if you don't absorb that and really feel it, and it sounds like you have, through therapy, through facing it, through Googling trauma therapy, through facing it, through telling your kids, through talking to your mom or your brother, and are those relationships intact, or has everyone gone separate ways?
Well, I mean, my family was very close growing up. And then for a while it was like the world, it was us against the world, and we were very tight. And then it was like my dad imploded us over time. That trauma gets in there, and everybody deals with things differently. So one of the reasons I wrote this book, because I'm the one big mouth in my family, was like to hand this to I sent copies to everybody, hoping they would read it. So I got an early copy to my mom. I had been home. She calls me in between things, right around the time it's publishing. She's like, I couldn't put it down even though I knew what was going to happen. Yeah. I was like, God bless you, Mom. But like that, as like a writer, that's what you want to hear. I can't put it down.
I couldn't put it down. It's exactly right. And I know this community has welcomed you, as you should be. Again, not your fault, didn't know. I'd like to take questions from the audience if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphones on the right and left side and just state your name. You can ask any question that you may have. But again, I guess brave is the word, to write this, look people in the eye and say, I am BTK's daughter, because you are not by choice. And welcome. Go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just want to say that my takeaway from this session is that I sat here and listened to a woman named Kerri who's so very eloquent and strong. So thank you, Kerri, for opening up your life with us today.
Thank you.
Kerri.
Thank you.
Kerri. That's who you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us today. I wanted to ask, did anyone, you, your mom, your brother, did you ever receive anything from your father resembling an apology?
Honestly, about the closest I think is after he pled guilty, like he said that he loved us and that whatever he did was far away from family love and that he knew he had big problems. Like, I mean, you can quote me back from my own book, but I'm pretty sure he's never said he was sorry. And he does not like to face what he is with us. Like, he's very compartmentalized, like, you're still my daughter, and he doesn't like it that we know what he is.
Right. And I'm sorry, I have one more hopefully brief question, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Have you spoken with your mom? Has she ever given any indication that now, in retrospect, she saw clues, signs that she didn't recognize before?
I mean, we tried not to sit there too much. He was very controlling, but he also, most of the time, was a good guy. So when we did see those behaviors, it was more like you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg and you're not going to imagine that he's murdered children. I mean, I write in my book, when my brother was a young adult, my dad attempted to strangle him twice. My mom and I were there, we pushed him off, my brother. Like, why did we not call the police? Why did we not talk about that later? Those are those questions that sort of haunt me.
If you did, I wonder if it would have changed anything.
Yeah, would
or
it have
not.
changed anything if the police had come? He worked for the police.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to jump from this guy,
Oh, he has a temper. Obviously, he's a serial killer.
Right.
Yeah, you don't. I know it sounds ridiculous over here in hindsight land. I mean, there was just nothing
There.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Kerri, I'm really super proud of you. My father also was a serial killer. He killed, by definition, he didn't really have a pattern, but he killed over 10 people that we know of. I have a podcast, and I was really nervous about coming. This is my first Crime Con.
Oh.
I was really nervous about coming, and then I saw that you were going to be here, and I felt a lot better. And I just want you to know you are not alone. There's other of us.
Well, you're definitely not alone. And
Thank you.
If you want to holler at me after we sign,
Yes.
we can connect.
I mean, we have a lot in
So-
common. It's a lot different, but you're amazing. I'm really proud of you. This is something I'm freaking out just standing at this microphone in front of these people.
Oh, no, you're doing
But you
good.
sitting on the stage and telling your story, it's amazing. When you go home, take good care of yourself.
I will.
This is very therapeutic for us, but then we get home and we're by ourselves, alone with our thoughts and trying to raise children.
Yeah.
So take good care of yourself. Do good things for yourself.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yes.
And proud of you for being here and speaking.
Thank
So.
you.
Wow.
Hi, Kerri. You mentioned that your DNA helped catch your father. How did that happen? And I'm curious, the trauma you went through, did that help a little bit? Like, you know what? I helped catch this guy and stop him or anything. Can you just talk about that a
And
little
your
bit?
father's
If you want to,
reaction.
if that's uncomfortable.
Oh,
your
no,
book.
you're good. So my dad was playing cat and mouse games, is what he calls it, with the police. He came back in communication in 2004. He sent 11 communications drops. They were working back and forth communicating with him in 2004. He sent this computer disk to them. They were able to trace the disk back to my dad, so they're pretty sure they had it, but they wanted to confirm it. So the KBI came up with this idea to go up to my college, Kansas State, and go through my health records thinking I probably had had a pap smear. So they got a subpoena and a warrant, and they found this old slide. Actually, I think it was a polyp. I'm still not 100% sure. There was a benign polyp removed when I was in college. And they took the slide to the crime lab in Topeka, Kansas, and somebody extracted my DNA from it and matched to my father. So they called the police, called the detectives the night before my dad's arrest and said, we got him on my DNA. So of course I don't know any of this, so I was asked to swab my DNA the next day. There's this whole thing with the FBI guy didn't know how to swab, and I was like, well, on CSI we use Q-tips. I mean, they use Q-tips. So like, I think we can just do that. So like a week later, now CNN is saying I had turned my dad in and I had given blood. I was like, I didn't turn my dad in and there was no blood. And so like, I'm known as the pap smear girl. So, I mean, at the time I was very angry at the media, you know, angry at this misinformation that was out there, confused about it, you know, not thrilled people were digging through my medical records, although it did catch my dad. Later on, then, you know, I understood why they had to do it, why they did it that way. And yeah, I helped catch my dad.
In a narcissistic way, didn't your dad comment and say you have a lawsuit against them?
Oh, well, so my dad wrote me, and he's like, I heard you turn me in. I know that's not right, and I don't hold it against you. Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The reason that your father interests me, and I'm sure many so much, is because of the nature nurture thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if you can think of a time when your dad was just really kind.
Yeah, I mean, there is that huge nature nurture debate with these criminals, with these hardcore, you know, serial killers. Like, what happened to them? I mean, my dad has 3 younger brothers. They turned out fine. They were raised in the same environment. That's the nurture. The nature is, was he born with some kind of disconnect? You know, most of us have that moral line we will not cross, or we'll feel bad about it if we do lie or we do something wrong. You know, we feel guilty. Now, somebody like my dad really doesn't seem to have that capacity to feel guilt. But I just knew my father as a normally pretty gentle, loving, caring man, you know. So part of the reason I'm speaking up is to say, look, we're missing these guys. They look like everyday people. They're working next to police. Sometimes they are police.
They don't look like monsters.
They don't look like a monster. They do monstrous things, but they also can love. And we got to get out of that narrow profile box of saying that they're hardcore. Yes, they're psychopathic. Yes, they can put on their mask and their layers. But I legit believe to the end of my days that he did love us.
They can cook scrambled eggs, say check the oil, care about you as a daughter,
Right.
care about your brother,
Right.
turn around and be this murderer,
Right.
serial killer.
Yeah, and people don't want to face that. They don't want to believe it could be their dad or their husband or their brother or their neighbor, so they're not looking at these people. Now, I'm not saying go home and check everybody out. But I'm saying we need to stop thinking of them as hardcore, one-way, narrow-minded monsters. And I know it's crazy to think that these guys have the capacity to love and to care, but it wasn't pretend. It was a 34 years loving relationship with my mother. Now, is she a victim and was she gaslit at times? Yes.
But there was no way you could have predicted what your father really was and who he was. Go
No.
ahead, sir.
Hey, how's it going? I'm one of a few dudes that's in here, and I'm just kind of curious. I didn't know much about your story. I'm here with my girlfriend, and I heard you had a brother, and I just know you kind of remind me of my sister and the various tragedies in my family. I know how me and my 2 brothers and my sister all kind of handle it differently, and even though we're all supportive of each other, you know, everyone kind of has to go their own route for, you know, forgiveness and recovery and all that. And I'm just curious if you are willing to talk about how you know, the brother in your family is kind of handling it, you know.
Well, thankfully, he was in the Navy for 4 more years after my father was arrested. So in some ways, that was protective. Like they kept an eye on him and kept him busy and out of like the limelight. And then he went to college on the GI Bill, and now he's working. So he keeps more of a quiet life. I
Is
mean,
he living in Kansas?
Yeah, near there. So, you know, everybody deals with things differently. I almost
really
broke,
differently,
Yeah.
too, right?
like, I kind of broke that Midwest code of we don't talk about our problems and we have our stuff together and we look fine and, we take care of our own. And
I think that's East Coast too.
maybe it's everywhere, So I was the one here talking, but talking helps me. And, I have some family members that don't really seem to deal or don't want to talk. I mean, it's fine. You can be shut down the rest of your life and not face this, but we're going to talk about it.
Do you think you'll ever write your father again or communicate with him? Because I know you
Legally, I
cut
don't
it
think I can.
Which is a good thing. And being in prison, we were speaking earlier, he'll just lose things. Because how would that affect him, I asked, to be cut off if he did try to contact you?
Right. I mean, in 15, after I spoke up, he read my story in the Wichita Eagle, and it had been 10 years, and he said, he's like, for a second he was like, I finally understand, and I shed a tear. But in that same letter, he's talking about his body and his remains, because we've always agreed that we'll let him be cremated, and then we'll scatter him in the Flint Hills, because we're not going to give him a gravestone, because it would just be torn up anyway. And we've told him, 16 years, Dad, we'll take care of it. And he's over here like, well, you're not writing me enough or sending me enough money. I think I'll give my body to some woman in Arkansas.
Threatening you on that level, too.
Right, in the same letter saying he finally gets it. And so Mom's calling me because she's getting the same letter, and she's like, so I'm having to help Mom with Dad.
In one of his first letters from prison, in the beginning, he said to you, things are great here, we're treated like celebrities.
Oh, Lord. So when growing up, he always had to sit in the seat with his back to the laundry door, which is funny because we had this door that covered our dryer, so it looked better in our kitchen. My mom said when the police came in, they're like, what's behind that door? She's like, it's my dryer. So he always had to sit in a certain seat because he didn't like having his back to the door. It's like this mafia thing, I don't know. So he's in prison now. He's in the Sedgwick County Jail before he went to maximum security where he's now. And he wanted to have a special seat so he could see the room. And he felt like he was hosting the room. And he made sure that I knew, that it had cost him a candy bar for, the paper he wrote me on. So, that's where, that narcissism, it was like he just let it out now, and, I saw it. And maybe it was in hindsight.
Instead of at home, it's now in the prison that we're treated a certain way, and I act a certain way. Go ahead with your question.
First off, thank you so much for speaking and coming to CrimeCon. It's been an absolute honor to hear you speak.
Oh, thanks.
And seeing how far you've come and how comfortable, or at least on the outside, how comfortable you seem talking about it and being open and honest about therapy and how you shouldn't be ashamed of it is amazing. But I do want to know, how is your mom doing since all of this?
She's okay. She told me a lot later on that she had determined early on she wasn't going to be a victim. She wasn't going to let him define her life. She wasn't going to move. She wasn't going to hide. There's this rumor out here we were hiding. We weren't hiding. We were at my uncle's, and then she went back to the same job. She's at the same church. She moved a little bit to be near family, but she just refused to let him win. And so she's just maintained her normal life, and
good for her. Good for her. Thank you.
And Kerri, I think that's the example you're showing to everyone. One final question, go ahead.
Yeah, actually following up on that, is your mom actively communicating with him?
With my dad? Oh, no. So she wrote him the few months before he pled guilty. As soon as she pled guilty, she cut him off, divorced him, and never communicated with him again.
And was with the shredder.
With a shredder.
Thank you, everyone. And the book is called A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Faith, Love, and Overcoming, and truly inspiring. I know that word is overused, but it is true with Kerri. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Kerri.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to you.